Today's guest on the How We Can Heal podcast is someone very near and dear to my heart. Meghan Zipin is a physical therapist and yoga therapist specializing in managing the complex symptoms of trauma, PTSD, cancer, grief, and emotional distress. She was originally drawn to yoga to cope with the trauma of the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013 and has incorporated her personal learning into her healing work with others. She's served as a physical therapist specializing in oncology, has an MBA in management and leadership from Boston College, and has owned and run her own business for years. Meghan is a wife, a mama of 3, a dog mama, a lover of scarves, waffles, and do-it-yourself projects. Meghan and I first connected at an in-person workshop I was teaching in Boston, Massachusetts. After the workshop, she joined my Yoga for Trauma online training program and went on to complete the advanced training program in 2017. She's a founding member of the Center for Yoga and Trauma Recovery and is one of the kindest, most heartfelt humans I have ever met. And that's really saying something because I'm surrounded by helpers and healers. I'm so excited for you to meet and learn from her, so let's welcome Meghan to the show. Hello, and welcome to the How We Can Heal podcast. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I created this podcast to share deep conversations that encourage us to move through life's toughest circumstances. Let's get talking about how we can heal. Hey, this is for my mental health professionals and yogis out there. As you may know, I've been teaching about how to incorporate yoga practices into trauma recovery for a long time now. And in 2015, I brought those teachings online and created the Yoga for Trauma online training program. The program runs just a few times a year and is an amazing place to learn how to bring yoga and trauma work together in a skillful and grounded way. The community connects helpers and healers from all over the world who are deeply invested in trauma-informed yoga. You can find out all about it at howwecanheal.com/Y4T. That's howwecanheal.com/the letter Y, the number 4, and the letter T. Make sure to sign up for the wait list to be the first to know when enrollment opens next. Meghan Zipin, I'm so excited to have you on the How We Can Heal podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Meghan. So there's a lot of things I want to talk about today, and I think we'll weave through all of them. I think, first of all, we met through yoga. We met through trauma-informed yoga. And when I met you, you were teaching, right? You were teaching trauma-informed yoga, but I'm always curious what brings people personally to their yoga path, first of all. So maybe you can take us there. Let us know how you found yoga.
Yeah. We did. We met in Boston. I think I came to take one of your trainings for the first time. But I found the yoga mat in probably the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. I had been a runner, like a pretty intense runner, running marathons, and was a part of the Boston Marathon bombing. And my finishing time was the time of the first explosion. So my experience with that was very intimate. And although I tried running for pleasure many times after that, running was not my thing any longer. And at the time, I didn't know it, but following such a traumatic event, my body was just kind of like unraveling. And someone suggested yoga, and I tried a few different classes. I didn't care for it because it was too slow, and it let my mind go in too many directions. But then I found one particular teacher and one particular class that had a bit more of an athletic feel, and it was a vinyasa class, and she just kept me moving the whole time, and that fluidity of breath, fluidity of movement, although with a runner's body, I was probably very clunky. I got kind of instantly sucked into that particular type of space, community, and yoga practice.
Yeah, it's a powerful practice. And, I appreciate the transition from such a traumatic event. I mean, I always think of you saying my foot was on the finish line, right? Literally. And it's to start unpacking that amidst everything, it's also a huge tragedy for your area. So everyone around you is going through this thing. It's kind of similar to COVID in a weird way of like
Yeah.
everyone's going through it. And then you have an individual experience as well. And so to find yoga and to find something that could like really meet your whole system where it's at and find a way to move some of that energy seems really powerful. And, we're both in sort of the trauma-informed yoga space now. And, in any world, once we get sort of a certain level of training or expertise, we get opinions. And so I hear all the time people like this type of yoga or that type of yoga. And I'm just like, hey, you got to see what does the person need? What does their body need? What does their soul need? What's working? And yeah, I resonate too. I definitely was attracted to like a movement, flowing, move some energy type of practice initially, and still love that. Yeah. I'm curious, what do you feel like, and this is probably informed by what you know now since you've studied this stuff too, but maybe just in a body sense, like what do you feel like it was doing for you to move through some of those more athletic practices?
I think at a very basic level, it gave me a place to go and it gave me a purpose. Because if I signed up for the class and I got familiar with the space, I got familiar with the teacher and all of those things that I could rely upon when everything felt very unpredictable and very unreliable, just the structure was attractive to me. Having my yoga mat, like it felt like something that was mine that I walked in with, I walked out with. There was like a ritualized type of component to it that I really liked. I liked that the teacher began and ended the class the same way each time. I was looking for anything that I could kind of anchor and
it's okay, we can say hi to Pim here too. Hey. Oh, folks on video, you are getting a treat right now. Listeners, we have a really cute baby with the best hairstyle ever, so you can check it out on YouTube.
I was looking for anything that I could anchor to. So at the beginning, it was just those things that really had nothing to do with yoga and just the structure of how classes run. But then with yoga and with vinyasa, I got very connected to listening to her voice and like just listening to her pacing and allowing her pacing to become mine, which isn't always a recommendation, both as a teacher now or, then. But for me, it gave me somebody else to hook onto who was very regulated. And I could mirror and pair with her without even knowing that that's what I was doing. And I used to, and I still kind of sometimes say that it feels like my bones are shaking. It gave a place for some of that energy that I didn't know what was happening in my body. It just gave it a place to go for a little bit of time. And there were times when I would take class twice a day. And again, it wasn't for the athletic component of it. It was that I felt better when I was there. And so I say to my students actually a lot of the time, like, let's find something that feels good and let's do more of that. And this was an example of that for me.
It makes me think of the like 20-minute face down Shavasana I just did like an hour ago.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I'm going to stay here. Maybe no, I'm going to stay here. Like, this feels amazing.
I know, like a teacher always says, like, if you have more time, be like, yes, I have time.
I have time.
Let me lay here.
Face down in the fuzzy carpet.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine that your experience with yoga, like probably for most of us who practice yoga for a long time, it sort of evolves. What have you seen in terms of, how it impacted you initially and how that's evolved over time, and how has maybe your practice shifted?
It's shifted in as many ways as like healing can shift over time. At first it was just trying to get through the class. Like I was so inflexible and clunky and, without knowing it, was breathing so shallowly. I was probably like just getting enough air to like stay awake. And all of this were symptoms that, would later manifest as pretty complex PTSD. But over time, my breath got a little bit deeper. My ability to attend became a little bit, it improved. And I found with my ability to attend, I got more interested in like the technicality of it. Like I went through the phase of like wanting to do the poses correctly.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a phase I'm sure many teachers and students go through, and I'm sure people practice as. So I went through that phase, and as a physical therapist and kind of knowing how the body works, I liked to understand why certain cues were happening, and so I went through that phase. Several years kind of into practicing, kind of learning the lesson of the poses that are hard for you, or the practices that are hard, are probably some of the ones that we need. I had a little bit of more space in my life to trial some of that. And so with the right teachers at the right time, with the right conditions, starting to do more restorative, or at least like slower flow and then maybe restorative. Jillian Pransky is one of my teachers, and I remember she told me one time we were doing belly breathing, and if you're someone who has been breathing shallowly for like 5 years, belly breathing, I couldn't even figure out like what to turn on or off. And she told me that my job in that moment was to think about how it might feel to take a belly breath. And like that's where I was starting.
Yeah, using your imagination.
Yeah.
I love that, and I really appreciate that arc. And I think for many of us, when we have a lot of energy, especially I think if it's coming from PTSD, or even if we're just like speaking in yoga terms, rajasic, fiery, athletic, that yoga does a great job of helping us recognize how we can shift gears and what we need for that. And it has so many ways that we can make choices to move in one direction or the other, right? And so it makes it a little more approachable than day one with the nervous system full of fire, hey, and shaky bones, lie down and belly breathe, right? Like that doesn't really feel accessible at that point. But, a few days, months, weeks, years of vinyasa, and then you go, oh, actually, I really love that face down shavasana, or I can hang out in child's pose a little longer. And that starts to sort of build this, I almost want to say like mobility within your system, and just different options of how to be, or how you might influence how you're feeling and sort of regulate yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, teachers had a lot to do with it. Teachers, and then folks who became mentors and kind of other students. There was a lot that I was drawn to that was just going and following the rules, like I said, because everything felt so unpredictable. I wanted something very, very predictable. Like it's going to go like this, and the greatest variation is going to be the playlist, and I am okay with that. But as I got more comfortable in the practice and I expanded kind of like the breadth and depth of the teachers I would take. And they offered me choices. There was a long time I didn't take them. I was like, no, like I'm cool here. But even having a choice to move my hands or not, or a choice like that, I didn't have to follow a script, and that things were still going to be okay. Like the walls were still standing if I chose to come out of Warrior 2 rather than go deeper into it.
Yes.
It required someone to give me that option. I would not have taken it on my own at that time.
So I'm curious about you. You have this, I mean, what words do we even use? Like awful, horrific, shocking experience, traumatic experience. And you find, somebody says, hey, maybe try yoga. You find your way to yoga. I mean, it stands out to me too, like as a runner myself, like what a loss that is, just to sort of lose something you love in that way. And I know, because we've had conversations about this, that you like tried, right, to like still have it be the thing, and it just wasn't the thing anymore. But think it's really beautiful that you found yoga and that you found, a teacher in a class and a place that felt supportive and even healing for you. And I also think it's really beautiful that then you continue, or you trained and use all your other training in terms of physical therapy and other things to offer this to others. But I'm curious about the PTSD piece. Like, did you understand PTSD before your personal experience of it, or is that something you started learning about after?
I feel like I understood it to the degree that I knew what the word stood for.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people understand what the words stand for. And I know that trauma as a whole has more like definitions than I'm not a therapist, then I'm sure we could talk through this session. But the more that my body kind of settled into this pattern of being on such high alert with such a level of vigilance and interrupted sleep and panic and at the time we actually lived in New Hampshire and I was going to business school in Boston and I never returned to my house in Portsmouth. I couldn't get myself over the bridge to leave this city. There was like my whole body would just go into this, like drop into a memory of just like being unsafe. And if I wasn't in my city with my people, near the people I wanted to get to, then I couldn't do it. And explaining that to people when you don't know what's going on yourself is just like an additional layer of yuck. And I think I told you recently that, I didn't even want to say that I had PTSD probably until like 3 or 4 years after the bombing actually happened. Not because I thought it would go away, but in a way there was an excuse because it had just happened. So everybody, the whole city, and whatever the ripple of that is outside of a major public terrorist attack, everyone's kind of feeling it, but it's kind of once the news is passed, and you notice that life is moving on, and you're kind of not. And I rested in that place for a really long time before I said, like, I think I might have PTSD and need more help, resources, whatever, than I'm currently like surviving in. I was surviving, I would say.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's, like, with that element of a tragedy happens, people, there's an outpouring usually of response,
Right.
and then people kind of start to move on. And, right now it's been 9 years,
Yep.
right? So I'm wondering if there's anything you feel like you wish people knew about the impact of those types of events, or the impact of PTSD in the long term. I know, we were also talking recently about, it's like, yeah, it's become common to say healing is not linear. It's like circular and iterative and dancing all over the place and what's going on. So is there anything you want to share just about, how this has impacted you personally and the trajectory of your life?
I would say it changed my life completely. I was married for 9, 12, 4 years at the time. My marriage shifted completely. The way we communicate shifted completely. And in part, it was out of necessity. It's become, far more regular now, 9 years later. I would want people to know that it's okay to reach out to someone, even if time has passed, because to that person, they may not write you back, and I wouldn't hold that expectation to them, but to that person, it's still a really big deal. and they certainly haven't forgotten. For me, I have like 2 points of impact. I have the night before the marathon every year.
Oh yeah, that was a hard one.
Is always a very hard time for me because I always think about it as this was the last night that things are the way they or were the way they were before. It was the end of before I knew all these things, before I lost all these things, before I joined this club of people that I never would wish for someone to join. Um, And then for me, the marathon usually happens, and it's usually 4 or 5 days later that I have like a really full body experience of not necessarily being there, but of all of those symptoms: the vigilance, the jumpiness, the panic.
Like a body memory.
Yeah, like a body memory. I would want people to know that oftentimes folks with PTSD can't necessarily name what's happening in their body. Like there's not a vocabulary for it. Um, it may like change how they need to operate in a day or in a period of time. Um, and it's not a reflection of maybe whether or not they want it to be going that that way. Um, and anything can influence it, like being pregnant and having hormones can influence it. Seeing, for me, like if I think of like hallmark things, like I stopped at a gas station once and bought milk for one of my other children, and the clerk had a reminiscence to me of someone involved in the bombing, and I turned white as a ghost and like had a freeze response in a gas station on a random night buying milk because for a split second for me, I had that connection. So things are happening all the time. And like I want to offer everyone grace, and I would just say back, like, you don't know everyone's story, so perhaps try to offer it back.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And that's a great transition into something else I wanted to talk with you about too, which is offering it back, which you've done so beautifully. And I know you were, and still are, a physical therapist. You were working in hospitals, you were working with cancer patients, and this experience shifted that feeling like, oh, I can go into work and do this sort of daily thing that other people do. And so you shifted into offering what was nurturing for you and offering trauma-informed yoga and yoga classes and private yoga classes. And I think what's super unique and awesome about you is that you offer touch in trauma-informed yoga, right? And part of that is your training, your really deep training in physical therapy. But also I don't think you're really doing it in the way of like, as people in the yoga world would call like adjustments, right? Like for the most
No.
part, I think you use it in a very different way. So could you share a little bit about that transition into offering yoga, and then how you do it, and then how you use touch there?
Yes. I I like to think that some of what I offer is probably what I wanted during that time in my life, but I don't know if that would actually be true. It's probably something that I needed and didn't know, and couldn't name it because maybe I would have found a body worker or maybe I would have found something, but it almost like that would have been too much, too direct, like sensory overload. So in part, I'm a yoga teacher, and I work with folks who are medically complex, that could come in many different forms. A lot of the time, it happens to have an oncology sphere to it, but that is just because of my background in oncology. Um, it helps me keep people who are undergoing treatment safe.
Yeah.
But I also work with folks who are just, you know, either having a hard time or having a perfectly normal time and want to work on yoga. I think what's different though is between a yoga adjustment and touch that I implement, an adjustment is kind of like doing something to somebody. I think of it that way. Like regardless of how you're trained, you're offering a change to someone's body with an adjustment, and with kind of utilizing your hands as a complement to a yoga practice. It's more of like a teammate, just kind of meeting you where you're at. It's not directive in its nature. It's not adding force. It's literally a meeting, like a connection between two beings. And I use that sometimes if I see someone breathing really quickly, if I see someone who's nervous, or if I see someone that I don't even know, I feel like intuitively just needs to be met where they are. A hand resting on someone's shoulder can go a really long way as far as just saying, like, I'm here with you, and there's nothing that you have to change.
Yeah. So what does that look like in your, let's just say, one-on-one work with folks? Like, who do you feel like, there's a strong pull in trauma-informed yoga community too, or there's some people that teach touch can be harmful, it can be triggering, so we should never touch, right? And I feel like whenever we do an all or nothing, everything's okay, nothing's okay. At some point we have to kind of swing back to the middle and figure out, well, when is it helpful? When is it not helpful? How can we do it? How can we do it with intention and care and skill and sensitively? So I'm curious, especially, I know there's a lot of folks who are offering trauma-informed yoga who might want to, start to offer touch at a certain point. So how does that work for you? And what are maybe some of the barometers or things you place around it in order to support it being trauma informed?
I think I do come to the table with a rest and comfort with touch, and that's from being a physical therapist for so many years prior to teaching yoga. Because I remember even when I was doing my teacher training, observing other people approaching someone and trying to figure out how or where to touch them. I could see the awkwardness. So I think that practice is something that needs to happen with like a safe population, like practice touching your in a yoga session, friends or people that are okay with touch. For me, there are a few kind of like guiding principles. One is that I always touch with my whole hand, meaning there's never an interruption between the space on my hand and someone else's body. Touching folks like for the first time or in a trauma-informed way, I think it means never being a ghost and always being a human. And what I mean by that is like you don't want to be a hovering hand who's about to touch someone but never actually does it. Or you don't want to be so close that you like kind of graze somebody's shoulder. That is distracting and could probably influence someone's experience in a negative way for certain folks. I try to remember that every time my hand comes off of somebody's body and I put it back on, that their brain needs to go offline and come back online again for interpreting that touch from an anatomic, like physiologic perspective. New input every time is turning on the brain every time. Making sure that my whole hand has kind of like created that seal and that I'm not jittery or nervous or um, any of those things. Common places that I like to rest hands. And by resting hands, I don't mean that it's like
Hanging out there.
hanging out there or like, yeah, I'm like doing it with my hand. Like it's not like a gooey hand or like blowing in the wind. I just mean that it doesn't have a tight grip to it. Like all of my knuckles are not gripping. I like to hold heels of people's feet. I like to put my hands resting with a whole flat hand on the side of someone's calves. So kind of, far from any potential like sensitive areas of like any sort of midsection. I always tell a person where I'm going before I get there, and I also always tell them when I'm going to leave. Because sometimes it's just as jarring for the hands to come off. And the things that I typically notice are, or signs that I look for that this is something, okay, keep going, is maybe a decreased pace of breath, maybe an increased depth of breath. Sometimes you might feel a change in muscle tone, like someone is, I have a 4.5-year-old, and if I tell him to show me a muscle, he like makes a really, really strong like arm muscle. People don't realize that they're bracing in these positions that sometimes, on the surface is, oh, you're resting, you're in Shavasana, but if I threw a pebble on you, it would bounce. So any type of, I don't really love the word softening, but just less. Anything that we can have less of as far as muscle tone is concerned.
I love that too because I love the word softening. And so it just shows how we all have our different
Yeah, exactly.
soften this and soften that. You're like, that teacher's not for me.
Yeah, soften isn't for me. One of my words, resilience is not for me. So we all have our own.
Resiliency is not for me with the Y on the end, but that's a whole other conversation. It's just not for me. It's okay. Other people can like it. You just mentioned something I wanted to pick up on. You said you tell people you're going to leave. How do you do that? Like, what do you say? Do you count down, or do you say like, here I go? Or
No, I don't count down. I think any type of, when I think of like counting up or counting down, that preparatory work, I would say for a person with PTSD, actually could be quite activating in my
yeah, and
experience.
that's what I was thinking. It's like, countdowns, we think of like something big is going to happen,
Right.
right?
So let's say I have my hands on the sides of someone's calves. I'll probably, with my hands still on them, say something like, in a moment, you're going to feel my hands leave your calves. If I'm not going somewhere else on the body, I will tell them that. If I'm going to move to their heels, I might say, in a moment, you're going to feel my hands come off of your calves. And if it's okay, you're going to feel them slide underneath your heels. I'm not going to move. And that kind of that's the start, the transition, and the end point. So if it is something that's stressful, that these are the 3 things that'll happen, and then not to expect something else.
So who might touch be good for?
That's a really good question with, I think, a million answers. I trial some form of touch with almost all of my clients, with verbal consent, of course, because I think sometimes we don't know what we don't know. I definitely fell into that category on my yoga path, of what might be helpful to me and what might not be helpful to me. One of the stories that I tell when I talk about being in good hands is I had a young woman who came to see me from a referral through her therapist, to get her body moving again, after she had a very sudden and community level public loss of her husband. They had a young child, and one moment things were one way, the next moment they were very different. And in the first session, she was very quiet. We hardly had any verbal exchanges. She did exactly what I told her as far as, poses are concerned. She didn't take any options as far as choice is concerned. And at the end, I was resting my hands under her heels. And she told me that that was the first time really anybody had touched her since her husband had passed away. And that was just profound to me, because here we were kind of identifying an absence of touch, that she probably didn't even know. She probably on some level knew was missing, when you think of what a partner may provide, but she didn't come to me seeking it.
Saying, this is what I need. I need touch. I need hands-on assists.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that point of we don't always know what we need. And I think as trauma-informed yoga teachers and sometimes as therapists too, there's really we're looking for those needs, and verbally asking is not the only way, right? Like sometimes we have to dig for them a little bit and do that together, or even do that with some leadership on the behalf of the teacher or the provider, right? To say, okay, well, is it this? And that can get a little scary, a little messy, a little clunky at times. But if you don't do that, then you're not as likely to find what that need is. You're kind of swimming around in the confusion together. And so that, I think, is a challenge, because we have this like do no harm, right, oath that, at some level, even in yoga, like we're all sort of committed to as medical professionals or mental health professionals or even yoga teachers, like we don't want to hurt. And I think especially in trauma-informed yoga, like people get really afraid of triggering someone. And that's better than not caring and being blasé and, knocking people over and triggering them left and right. But I think, again, kind of coming to that middle, it's like, well, where do we find the places we can explore intelligently, where we can even lead someone and say, how about this? Is this helping? Is this doing the thing that we think it would do? And helping, especially with that so common, right? Like, I don't have words for this right now feeling. Like, can we guide folks into discovering some of that and some of those things that can be helpful? Just like, someone's not thinking, oh, I lost my husband, I really need touch now. But they show up to a trauma-informed yoga class and then they realize, oh, wow, I haven't been touched since I lost my partner. Hey, this is for my mental health professionals and yogis out there. As you may know, I've been teaching about how to incorporate yoga practices into trauma recovery for a long time now. And in 2015, I brought those teachings online and created the Yoga for Trauma online training program. The program runs just a few times a year and is an amazing place to learn how to bring yoga and trauma work together in a skillful and grounded way. The community connects helpers and healers from all over the world who are deeply invested in trauma-informed yoga. You can find out all about it at howwecanheal.com/Y4T. That's howwecanheal.com/the letter Y, the number 4, and the letter T. Make sure to sign up for the wait list to be the first to know when enrollment opens next.
Yeah, I mean, I think you never really know what someone's going to walk away with. I make an effort to make folks individual playlists that then they can have with them, so that if the music is something that's helpful to them, they can play it in the car, they can play it at home, they can play it if they're having a hard time. They don't have to be doing yoga, because perhaps that'll trigger, just that positive experience. I feel like if you're a teacher who would be teaching someone to one day get into handstand, and one day you have a client who, I had a woman who had cystic fibrosis, and there's no way that, someone would say, oh, she's going to go and see Megan, to work on handstands. But what she needed to do was be reminded that she could do things. And so getting her into a supported handstand against the wall was more valuable than any sort of deep breathing for cystic fibrosis that I could have done that would have been helpful to her. Um, so I think if we're willing to like think outside of the paradigm within a scope of safety, um, there's so many things that we should try.
Yeah. Even you just mentioned music, and I know there are people who are like, no music, because music could be triggering. And it's like, well, anything can be triggering or resourceful. Yoga shapes, yoga postures, yoga breath, the room, the person, like, you know, you mentioned the gas station person, like we can't really control that. We can try to be mindful of it and, you know, remove things that are obviously insensitive, but you know, even something like music, it could be a trigger. It could also be a huge resource. So if you can find the angle of the resource on as many things as possible, great, right? And then it's like this extra thing, like you said, you take it with you, you have your yoga playlist in the car, and it has that association. It connects you to that part of your practice, to the person you work with. I mean, I thought of this when you said it. When I went away to college at UCLA, I was leaving the San Francisco Bay Area, and I, you know, grew up around here my entire life. And I'd been going to this exercise class with my mom down at the Beresford Recreation Center. Shout out to Patty Stetson Michelson. I loved her. She's just so like one of these amazing, amazing gifts of a teacher. And this is going to date me. She recorded a cassette tape of the music that she played in class, because she had like new music every season, and everyone would always look forward to like, what's the mix for this, you know, fall or whatever. And so she gave me the one from, you know, whatever, probably summer of 1997 or 98 or something. And I played that when I would like wake up and go for a run at UCLA, and I played it over and over. I would just get my little Walkman on and I would go for a run around, and I would just feel this connection to this group of people that I had just left, and to this teacher and woman who is very inspirational for me and has like amazing energy. And there's that resource right there. And it was like, I don't even know. I wish I could find it and dig it up, but you know, it's like pop music, like high energy. I don't even know how to
And you're gonna
describe
have
it.
to find a cassette player.
I know. I'm gonna have to find one, and I bet you I still have it. It's in a drawer somewhere with a whole bunch of journals.
Yeah. I think, you know, a lot of this is about doing your homework, right? Like, so on an intake form, I have a question about music, and I have questions about touch. And the only thing that I really say when a student comes in to see me after our like first session is there anything that you want me to know about today? And I found that over time and now years of doing this, that on the very, very, very I should say that if there's something I need to know, I find that people share it. And leaving it as kind of an open-ended offering, that if at any point there's something you want me to know, like we're in this as a team. Part of our job as trauma-informed yoga practitioners is being really keen observers and being responsive to what you're observing.
100%.
And what you're hearing. And in the case that you have your hands on someone, if your hands meet someone's body and there's, you know, anything from an explosive response to even a slight tremor, like that should be enough information to alter what's happening in that moment and be responsive and, you know, in many ways, like respect what's happening in that moment.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I have so many thoughts, and I'm just watching you like rock Pim a little bit side to side as you go. And I'm thinking about how central the relational element is to a lot of this, and the responsiveness. Like I always think of, you know, reciprocity and responsiveness. I start thinking of attachment stuff. And so that's why I'm like watching you, and I'm like, oh, there's so much beauty in these connections. Like you described the space that you found soon after the bombing in terms of yoga, you found this place that had the structure that you needed, that had the person that worked for you, and you could kind of attune to that rhythm and lean into it. And I think that's really natural for us as human beings too, especially when we're feeling disrupted by something. Like, wait, that's what we do as kids. We go and we fall and scrape our knees, and then we like go hug someone's leg and cry and try to find that regulation again, right? And so I don't think we give ourselves that grace as adults that at any age, if something really disruptive happens, like that's the impulse, that's the instinct to like go find something that feels safe enough, where you can regather yourself and, cry and feel how you feel and move through it, and then kind of step into healing. But it is just so beautiful to see you rocking.
Thank you.
There's so much I would love to keep talking with you about. Again, my brain is like popping off in all these different directions. So maybe we'll just have to have you back. And I do really want to hear you read your poetry at some point. So can we have you back to read your poetry and talk a little more, perhaps? Okay. I'll only be able to wrap up if I know that we can do that. Okay. So what would you say, people have been going through it, there's always something happening in the world, but it seems like it's been extra intense for the last handful of years. What would you say to people who are struggling themselves right now?
I would say find the things that feel good and do more of those. Introduce them in whatever tiny ways that you can. I would say that that's a really good question, right? There's so many big things happening. I think, yeah, I have to stick with one. Just find the things that feel good and do more of those. Whether that's being with people who help you feel good, whether that's like, for me, sometimes it's this teacher who's like really instructive. Like I don't want to be given options. Like I want you to tell me what to do, and I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to go home because like that's what I'm looking for. And then I think also just this guy just barfed on my hand. Being flexible,
Buddy.
but offering one another grace in the sense that we really don't know each other's internal landscape despite what's happening.
Unless it comes out and lands on your arm.
And then you say, oh, yes, like something could be wrong with that person. We don't know what's going on inside and how things that seem very far away could be touching people very close to home. So just being mindful of that and kind.
Yeah, we can all use a little bit of that grace. So, folks who are listening, I highly encourage you to check out the videos. You can see this amazing hairdo and face. And hi, Pim. So I don't know if this is going to be baby full picture. So I'll describe it for listeners. He has like this awesome sort of mohawk patch of hair right in the center of the top of his head. And he's got these like big eyes. Every once in a while we've been talking, he'll just look and I'm like completely distracted. It's like when I've had people bring their dogs to therapy before and I'm like, I'm sorry.
This will not be the best use of our time.
I brought my dog to therapy before and you're like, hey, over here. Okay, so last question, and maybe this is an obvious answer right now, but what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? My boys give me hope. I have a 4.5-year-old, an almost 3-year-old, and a 4-month-old, and being able to see them witness things for the first time and like what simple things bring them such joy. And this will sound like, oh, very boy mom, but like they will play outside in a pile of mulch for so long and they're content and they're happy and they don't have an expectation of the worst is about to happen, and they are okay with, simple explanations sometimes, like, oh, why isn't that person able to walk? Oh, because they, maybe they hurt their leg and it's just going to be different. And my older son always says, yeah, it's just different. It makes me hopeful that that they will experience. I want them to stay little for as long as possible and hold on to what makes them little for as much of their life as they can.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I'm thinking of, I saw you share was it Percy going into a puddle the other day and just wading into the puddle and just like going deeper and deeper, like up to his knees, and his pants are getting muddy. And he's just like, wow, this is so amazing. And you're there encouraging him.
Yeah, I was like, are you going to do it, buddy? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the puddle, Mom.
Tonight, tomorrow is, for our recording, tomorrow is May 4th, and they're having a Star Wars day at school, and they've never seen Star Wars for May the 4th be with you. So tonight we are having a movie night at our house, and that's so silly, but it makes me hopeful because to them they're saying, we're having a movie night. Will there be pretzels and popcorn? Yes, there will be. There's goodness out there, and it is my husband and my job from kind of the moment that bomb went off until today to make sure we show these guys all the good, because it shouldn't be marred by someone who thinks differently.
All the snuggly safety for those guys. And, I've met them and they're incredible. And I so admire your parenting and your love that you give through your work. And you're just such an amazing human, Meghan. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some of that with the listeners. And if people want to keep in touch with you, is there a website or somewhere we can send them?
Yeah, you can send them to meghanzipin.com, or you can find me on Instagram. You'll see a lot of pictures of curly-haired or bald-headed babies. But also you can read some of my poetry there and some yoga stuff as well.
Love it. And I think your poetry is, headed for print at some point. So we'll keep people posted on that too.
Yeah, hopefully early next year. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Meghan.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. My hope is that you walk away from these episodes feeling supported and like you have a place to come to find the hope and inspiration you need to take your next small step forward. I do want to make sure it's clear that this podcast isn't offering any prescriptions. It's not advice or any kind of diagnosis. Your decisions are in your hands, and we encourage you to consult with any relevant healthcare professionals you may need to support you through your unique path of healing. For more information and resources, please visit my website, howwecanheal.com. There, you'll find tons of helpful resources and the full transcript of each show. You can also click the podcast menu to submit requests for upcoming topics and guests. Before we wrap, I want to send thanks to our guests today, to Christine O'Donnell and Celine Baumgartner of Bright-Sided Podcasting, and to everyone who helped support this podcast, directly and indirectly. Alex, thanks for taking the dogs out while I record. I'd also like to give a shout out to my brother Matt. He passed away in 2002. He wrote this music and recorded it, and it makes my heart so happy to share it with you now.